afternoon. Welcome to Dialogue Presents All Are Alike. My name is Christian Kimball. I guess I'm the designated Dialogue Foundation speaker. I am also, I'm going to claim the hat as the Kimball family, the Spencer Kimball family representative here today. As a family, we have some interest in this topic. We have in front of you a best-in-class team to talk about the history, the future for race issues in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and the process by which change happens, all of the above. Couple of words of thanks. First of all, I am grateful. There have been some wonderful efforts gone to make this happen. I'm grateful for this venue. Thank you for arranging this. This is a wonderful setting and place, and parking was great. I want to give thanks for the moderator, Caroline Kline, today. Thanks for the speakers. Thanks to Emily Jensen, who behind the scenes does a tremendous amount to make this happen. And especially recognize Stephen Bradford, who's over there in the corner, who brought this all together and is really the mastermind of having this happen. And I want to say thanks to Dialogue, which has had a role in the story we're here to talk about, a role by seeking out and publishing Lester Bush's article in 1973, a role by being one of the places where dialogue about what happened, how it happened, why it happened could continue during periods when that kind of discussion was not welcome, and periods when it has been welcome. Dialogue has continued through all of those periods. In fact, I fielded the other day a message that expressed surprise that dialogue can do what we do. It was expressed as, don't you worry about alienating certain readers, listeners, viewers, who with points of view contrary to what you're talking about? And my answer was threefold. It was then and it is now. First of all, yes, we worry, and yes, we think about it. Second, it's way too late. I mean, the die is cast. Dialogue's reputation and Dialogue's position in this community is too well known, and we're not going to easily take sides. Caroline's nodding here. Caroline, as an incoming editor for Dialogue, is well informed about this. And third, that very comment in the question illustrates the importance of independence. Dialogue is an independent journal, and I think that's important. We need, and I guess not to be too political here, but I think recent events have made it even more obvious that we need independent journalism. We need independent journals. We need sources of information that are not controlled. What independence has come to mean in the Mormon world, with the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints representing the largest part of that world, it means to me broad-based public support. That means not support from the church or from a church organization, and it means not support from a wealthy individual who wants editorial control. To be clear, we're very happy for large donations, and we're very ready to hear editorial comment and questions and challenges, and we just don't want to link the two. Not link the money with the editorial, if you will. And that's what independence means for Dialogue, and that's the kind of public support that we have had for over 50 years, and the kind of public support that we need to continue to have to be continuing as an independent journal. Now, about the program, I'm going to ask Robert Burch to offer an opening prayer. Then I'm going to introduce the speakers, and then we'll turn the time over to Caroline Kline, who will moderate the discussion. We'll move into a Q&A after that on Caroline's direction, and then invite Stephen Bradford to give us some closing comments. Final note, we are webcasting, we are recording, and I guess that's a note you're always supposed to say when you're recording. Robert?
Our most kind beloved Father in heaven, we gather here as a congregation of the willing, and as such pray for thy presence, that you might help us to be able to learn to talk and to understand and become greater in thy plan as we learn to reach out to one another and find those things that we can do to become more like brothers and sisters. We surely realize that so many have suffered in our endeavor to come into thy church and be brothers and sisters in a real and meaningful fashion, and pray that you can help us find forgiveness and find realignment, that we might be able to do it better and to do it in a loving and kind fashion. And that we might stand here as we struggle to learn to be thy witnesses, that we might help establish the truth. And we ask this especially, that it be done in the name of thy beloved Son and for our growth and our edification. We ask these things in Jesus' name. Amen.
That's Robert Burch, husband to Alice Burch. Alice was born to Cleo and Elwanda Dale Faulkner, right? Raised in Oxnard, California. She volunteers for Utah's only Black history organization, the Seema Hadatha African American Heritage and Culture Foundation, whose focus is on researching, teaching, and preserving Utah's Black history, in addition to creating exhibits that are sent out all over Utah. I like that phrase, Seema Hadatha, which is Swahili for to tell the story, which is what we're doing here. Alice married the great love of her life, Robert Burch, in 2012. She enjoys reading, writing, and whole cloth quilting. But I suppose the credential that brings her here today to our attention is that Alice edited a book called My Lord, He Calls Me, Stories of Faith by Black American Latter-day Saints, published by Deseret Book in 2023. Matthew Harris, I'm skipping people here. I won't try to reverse that order. Matthew Harris is a specialist in U.S. history with a particular focus in religion and the law, church and state, civil rights, legal history, constitutional history, American religions, and Mormon studies. He received a BA and MA in history from Brigham Young University and an MPhil and PhD also in history from the Maxwell School of Citizenship and Public Affairs at Syracuse University. He's the author of numerous books and articles, including, for our attention, Watchmen on the Tower, Ezra Taft Benson and the Making of the Mormon Rite, and the book that brings us together today, Second Class Saints, Black Mormons and the Struggle for Racial Equality, published by Oxford University Press in 2024. Paul Reeve, in the middle, is the Simmons Chair of Mormon Studies in the History Department at the University of Utah, where he teaches courses on Utah history, Mormon history, and the history of the U.S. West. He's project manager and general editor of a digital database, Century of Black Mormons, designed to name and identify all known Black Mormons baptized into the faith between 1830 and 1930. His book, Religion of a Different Color, Race and the Mormon Struggle for Whiteness, published by Oxford in 2015, received many awards, and as I understand it, was the basis on which he was invited to write Let's Talk About Race and the Priesthood, published by Deseret Book in 2023. Those are the three books I've mentioned that bring this panel together, if you will. And our moderator today is Caroline Kline. To my right, Caroline is a research assistant professor and assistant director of the Center for Global Mormon Studies at Claremont Graduate University. She holds a PhD in religion from Claremont. Her areas of interest include contemporary Latter-day Saint women's communities, feminist theory, and oral history. Her book, Mormon Women at the Crossroads, Global Narratives and the Power of Connectedness, explores Latter-day Saint women's lived experiences in Botswana, Mexico, and the United States. And she is the incoming co-editor of Dialogue, a journal of Mormon thought. Caroline, your microphone.
Thank you. I am so thrilled to be here to moderate this panel today. Just a quick note, both Paul and Matt have books available for purchase. Alice, you do not. Both Paul and Matt have books available for purchase outside those doors. I am sure they'd be more than happy to sign any copies. So don't hesitate to approach them after this panel. So my role today is just to ask a few questions and get our panelists talking. I do want to leave a lot of time for questions from you all. So the way this is going to work is I'm going to ask some questions probably for about 45 minutes, and then there should be about 45 minutes for you to ask our panelists questions. Please do be aware that there are probably a number of people here that have questions. So try to keep your questions short and sweet to the point. So I think we should just dive in. Let's get started on these questions. So let's set the stage for the 1978 revelation. And Paul, I'm going to ask you the first question, which is throughout the early and mid part of the 20th century, and this is something you write about in your book, racist teachings and what I might call folk doctrines about Black people and why they were restricted from temple ordinances and from priesthood ordination, they took root in many leaders' minds and in many members' minds within the church. Alongside this, like at the same exact time, there was all this segregationist thinking, and some of these practices were really infiltrating Utah in the church. So my question to you is, how and why did these various racist policies take hold in LDS communities, especially given the fact that, as we know from Lester Bush's famous article, there was a more inclusive vision of the church and of the gospel in its earliest years when it comes to race?
Yes, thank you, Caroline. So I think the best explanation, the way that I structure Let's Talk About Race and Priesthood, is in three phases. So the first phase is just simply open priesthood in temples. There were no racial restrictions within the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in the first couple of decades. And I lay out the evidence in the book. And then you have segregated priesthood in temples that across the course of the last part of the 19th century, and I think fully solidified in place at the beginning of the 20th century, sort of take place in fits and starts. They're not solidly in place, in other words, at Brigham Young's first utterance, but you have each succeeding generation unwilling to violate the precedent established by the prior generation, ignoring the fact that Brigham Young's precedent violated Joseph Smith's precedent of open priesthood in temples. And each succeeding generation then continues to solidify the racial restrictions. I think firmly solidified in place under Joseph F. Smith at the beginning of the 20th century. I think Joseph F. Smith, in other words, is just as much responsible for solidifying those restrictions in place as Brigham Young is for beginning the racial restrictions. By 1908, he will instruct Latter-day Saints to stop actively seeking people of Black African descent for missionary contact. So you have Joseph Smith, who claims 5 revelations in Latter-day Saint Doctrine and Covenants, stipulating the gospel must be preached unto every creature. That leaves no wiggle room. No one is to be left out, and early Latter-day Saints took that seriously. They are baptizing both free Black people in the American North, as well as around the globe, including a mission to South Africa in 1853, including a mission to Jamaica in 1853. And yet Brigham Young will stipulate a racial restriction beginning in 1852 that takes on a life of its own. So by the early 20th century, then the racial restrictions become there's a false memory that comes into play. The false memory is simply that the racial restrictions were in place from the beginning. God put them in place. Human beings can't do anything about it. It will take a revelation to get rid of. And it does, in fact, take a revelation to get rid of 70 years later. So Latter-day Saint leaders come to believe that story, and it is firmly entrenched. And I'll just share one quote that I think helps us to understand and answer your question. This is just Marion G. Romney, who is a counselor to President Kimball when he is wrestling with the matter. And Marion G. Romney, first counselor in the first presidency, says, knowing that President Kimball was wrestling with the matter, says, I did not expect him to get an answer. If the decision had been left to me, I would have felt that we've always had that policy and we would stick to it no matter the opposition. Sheer inertia and the weight of what many considered subtle doctrine in 1978 worked to President Kimball's disadvantage, in other words. So that helps us to understand, right, how those false doctrines, those false teachings solidified in place and were believed. And you had the leadership who simply said they've always been there and we can't do anything about it. And it's Lester Bush's 1973 article that really questions that standing story. And we have evidence then that President Kimball read and marked up that 1973 article, and it gave him then reasons to rethink the existing narrative.
Right. Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's very interesting because it seems as if there was a rewriting of history, or at least a forgetting of history. And it's that rewriting that people use to justify why the ban could not be removed. So thank you. Thank you so much for that. So we're going to move forward a little bit in time now. And Matt, this one is for you. During the 1950s, 60s, 70s, you write in your book that various pressures descended upon the church that made some white members and leaders start to question, or at least feel uneasy about this ban. And now I know this is an enormous question, and you probably spent at least a third of your book talking about this, but can you just discuss a few of those factors that made church leaders wrestle with the current policies and teachings regarding Black people?
This is the 50s and 60s?
Yeah, 50s, 60s, 70s. What are the pressures that are descending down?
I think there's, anyway, thanks for being here today, everybody. This is really a pleasure to be in your presence. Also to be with Paul and Alice. We've been on panels together over the years, and it's always a pleasure to share this space with them. The Lester Bush has been mentioned, and some of you may recall that his path-breaking article that was published in 1973. The reason why it's so important is that he was the first scholar to get access to the first presidency's in the Quorum of the 12's meeting minutes that discuss race. And one of the aha moments that comes out of this research is that he learns there's not a revelation that's tied into Joseph Smith. And that's one of the reasons why Paul was talking about Brigham Young instituting the ban, is because there was no revelation saying one way or the other. Anyway, but Lester Bush's papers talk a lot about this stuff going on in the 50s and 60s and into the 70s. And I feel comfortable saying that those of us who work in this field stand on his shoulders. So a shout out to the late, great Lester Bush. The 50s and 60s, there's a couple things going on. Paul just referred to one from the 19th century. Now let's take the story forward to the 20th century. The idea to take the gospel to every creature and tongue is still in effect in the 20th century. But how do you do that if you can't get into the third of the world, if you can't get into sub-Saharan Africa? And so what happens in 1962 is that Nigerians want to they want the gospel. They've learned about it. And so they're writing the brethren letters. It starts in the late 40s, goes into the 50s, and the brethren just blow them off. They don't want to deal with it. Paul mentioned that after 1908, they were not interested in seeking out and going into predominantly Black neighborhoods. It was kind of, you come to us, we don't go to you. And so they would baptize them if they understood the racial restriction and agreed to the rules and the parameters, but they wouldn't seek them out. And so there's an interesting problem in the early 1960s when the brethren realized, we can't put them off any longer. We just can't do it. Let's figure this out. And Hugh B. Brown, I love Hugh B. Brown, he says that we ought to ordain them to the Aaronic priesthood so that we can get the NAACP off our backs. And President McKay says, so the optics are bad, having all white missionaries go to Nigeria and run all Black churches. This is not a good thing. And they're aware of this. And the civil rights group, the NAACP, they're talking about what's going on in Nigeria, what the Mormons are doing. Anyway, Brown says, let's ordain them to the Aaronic priesthood so that maybe we get the critics off our back. And also, I think it's the right thing to do. And President McKay, at this point, who's 91 years of age, he says, if we give them the Aaronic priesthood, they're going to want the Melchizedek priesthood. This is why I love Hugh Brown. That's the point, President. Anyway, so they feel the pressure, the incongruity of missionizing, globalizing the church with this ban in place. And I get asked this all the time, and I'm just unabashed in my emphasis, which is that this is the number one reason. We don't really have one reason as scholars. We have multiple reasons because things are complex and we're nuanced. But really, this is what's driving the end of the ban. President Kimball has this intuitive awareness that you can't globalize the church if you've got this ban in place. It's that simple. And there are other things going on too. It's hard to determine multiracial and biracial people who bears the one drop. And there are issues like that. But really, it's this idea to globalize that really is first and foremost in President Kimball's mind. The second thing is, I'm going to say something provocative because this is dialogue. That's what we do. So here's the provocative statement. I've just made the board nervous. But the provocative statement is, it would be hard to keep the ban in place after the civil rights movement. It'd be really, really hard because the church becomes an island unto itself when mainstream Protestant and Catholics are readjusting their theology vis-a-vis the civil rights movement. And so the brethren are aware of this, and they start having discussions by the late 60s to ordain Black men and women into the priesthood, into the temple rights. And the last thing I want to say here is the civil rights movement. And that is that there's this really big push in Utah for two civil rights bills. One is to protect African Americans in housing and in jobs. Prior to 1963, it was legal for people in Utah to say, you're Black, we're not going to rent this apartment to you, or sell this home to you, or hire you. And you could be that clear about it. And so obviously the Black community in Ogden and Salt Lake are not happy about this. This is just abject racism. So they're pressuring the church leaders and the Utah lawmakers, most of whom are LDS. They're pressuring them to come up with those two civil rights bills. And the issue with that is that the brethren are fearful of, if you allow these bills to move forward, then it could open the door to interracial marriage. That's what they're worried about. And I'm convinced that they had a crystal ball, and in that ball, they could see that it wouldn't lead to interracial marriage. They would have supported those two bills. Ultimately, they did because of the pressure involved. But initially, they were worried about interracial marriage. So all of those pressures to globalize and civil rights and talk about racial equality, that's what really gets them thinking about the need to make the church more inclusive.
Right, wonderful. Thank you. And Alice, this is for you. I'm hoping that you can reflect a little bit on the human experience side of what we've just been talking about. So as you write in your book, you have several essays by Black American members of the church in your book. And some of them, especially from those earlier years, they discuss the kinds of racism and just discrimination they were navigating within the church. And this is post 1978. This is also, of course, after 1978. What I would ask from you is, as I reflect on these stories that you collected, these essays, what can members of the church learn from the spiritual resilience of these early Black members of the church in the face of such overt discrimination?
This is an interesting question for right now because can you all hear me okay? More? Right,
It's not helping the group.
right. So okay.
Sorry.
I'm sitting up. Yeah. I'm sorry. When I get nervous, my voice does go down. So if you can't hear me, please let me know. Okay. So this is an interesting question right now. Is this good? Yeah. Okay. This is an interesting question for right now because recently the church is coming out with spiritual resilience classes like economic, what are they called? Like the economic classes. Thank you. Self-reliance classes. And so one of the self-reliance classes is on spirituality, spiritual resilience. So this is an interesting question for right now. What I've learned from studying Black Latter-day Saint history, meaning the individuals, not this topic, but the actual individuals, reading about individuals, is that their spiritual resilience came not from the church teaching it to them, because there were no lessons, and it came not from the LDS church supporting them or giving them any manner of assistance to continue forward in the church. It came solely and if you want to say uniquely, from the Holy Spirit himself. They relied solely on God to guide them, to teach them, to help them along. And when you look, especially if you're looking at the earlier members, when you look before they became members of the church, that was how they lived then. So why would they not have carried that habit into being members of the LDS church, whether they were members of a church previously or they were not members of a church previously? They believed on God, believed in God. They relied on Him, and they sought Him to know the truth and to receive personal revelation. We see this in Jane Manning James and her leading her family to Nauvoo, being rejected on the boat, and Jane's suitcase, trunk, being kept stolen by the boatsmen. They walked on foot approximately 800 miles to Nauvoo. And she says all along the way, the Spirit was with them, guiding them, teaching them, helping them. She said at one point their shoes wore out and they left bloodied prints in the snow as they went along. And she said they stopped and they said a prayer and they asked for healing of their feet and for and to be able to continue their journey. They didn't go, there was nobody in the church for them to go to get a priesthood blessing from. So who was there for them to rely on? They relied on God, and God sent His Spirit. And what did His Spirit do? His Spirit healed their feet. And pay close attention to this, and you can find this in her autobiography, which you can find online. She says, and we were healed forthwith. That means immediately upon asking for that blessing, it was given to them and it was done. We can also find this in the life of Samuel Chambers. Samuel Chambers was baptized as a young boy with his enslavers while he was still living with them, and he was left alone. I don't know if he was included in the meetings, the church meetings that were happening of the time, but from reading his own words, it sounds like he wasn't. And he says in his testimonies, he says that he was guided and taught again, notice not by a member of the church, not by leaders of the church, but by God. He was guided and taught by God and by the Holy Spirit. He was filled with the Holy Spirit, and he was taught by the Holy Spirit all along the way. Samuel Chambers could not read. To the day he died, correct me if I'm wrong, please. To the day he died, he could not read. His wife, Amanda, could read, and she would read to him. But he learned the scriptures through the Holy Spirit, and he learned the truth through the Holy Spirit. So when we talk about spiritual resilience, it isn't something that another person can give to us. It's something that somebody can teach us to get us started on that way. But we learn from these early members and even from members today. A lot of people will ask, well, why do Black people stay in the church? Well, that's kind of a divided question because there are different Black communities. Like if you ask, why do Black Americans stay in the church? Most of us stay because we received a revelation that said this was where, you know, we belonged. We were to come here and be baptized and join with this particular church. And that's what we've done. And for Africans, that's a different story. For Caribbeans, it's a different story. I don't know, you know, overall what that story is, but we've each have joined for different reasons. And it's been our relationship with God that has kept us going, that has maintained us. It's not been our relationship with other members of the church or with leaders. And I can tell you personally, for the majority of the time that I've been a member of the church, which is, help me with math, 1984 to now, what is that, 40 years? Is that 40? 40 years? Oh my gosh, I'm just a little older than that. So for the majority of my time in the church, I've not had visiting teachers or home teachers, and we're now in what is called the ministering program. I've never seen anybody. They've one woman called me, but that was when she was still my visiting teacher, and since then, that's been more than a year, and that was one phone call. I've had as many contacts as you can count on one hand with fingers left over in 40 years. That's how often I've been visited. And so the spiritual resilience comes through the Holy Spirit, and it comes because of the connection and the faith in God and in Jesus Christ. So to gain that, you can learn that from another person, but you cannot acquire that from another person. It can't be given to you. The way could be shown you a little bit by watching by example what others have done, but it has been by their own spiritual resilience that those early members remained in the church. It wasn't because somebody gave them food or paid their bills or gave them a house or paid their mortgage or their rent. It's been strictly that reliance and that belief, that faith in God that led them along.
Oh, thank you, Alice. Yeah, that's beautiful. That people's personal relationships with God helped sustain them in the midst of this system, which was so overtly discriminatory. So thank you so much for sharing that with us. Matt, I'm going to turn to you now and ask you about a certain anecdote in the book, which I found quite striking. And this is a moment in 1971 when some Black American church members, and they are, let me get it right, Ruffin Bridgeforth, Darius Gray, and Eugene Orr, these men had a meeting with three apostles, and these were Gordon B. Hinckley, Thomas S. Monson, and Boyd K. Packer. And in this meeting, they encouraged the apostles to grapple with this ban. Now, in the meeting, Gray actually asked these three men if the brethren had ever prayed together as a group to lift the ban. And it was so fascinating because you write that these three apostles couldn't say anything. They sat there in silence for moments. They had no response to this question. And again, remember, this is 1971. This is pretty late in the ban, right? So my question to you is, why do you think these highest leaders of the church had not prayed together about the ban in this era when there were already so many problems? People knew there were so many problems with the ban. And second, what does this anecdote tell us about the role of prayer alongside the role of like human effort or negotiation in the revelatory process?
Those are great questions. And so some of this story takes place on this campus. It's an amazing story. Just before I answer this question, years ago, I was in the special collections at the library, just not far from here on this campus. And one of my archivist friends, I know them well, and Paul knows them well. We've all worked with them. And anyway, she came out one day, one of the archivists, friend of mine, and she came out and she said, "Matt, you got to see this." And it was a stack of oral histories that were done in 1971 that had somehow been lost and not cataloged. And since she knew that I worked with race and these kinds of issues in Utah, it was a collection of African Americans who were interviewed by the Marriott Library, part of an oral history program. This is 1971. It was never digitized, of course, in those days. It was never cataloged for whatever reason. So she alerted me to this big stack, and as I'm going through, just sort of thumbing through, there were not just Black Latter-day Saints, but just anybody who was African American in Utah asking about civil rights, how'd you get here? So it's really fascinating. Well, anyway, I came across my friend Darius Gray. And as I start reading about that story from the origins of the Genesis group, my first thought was, Darius, that rascal. And anyway, Darius in real time in 1971, thinking about the ban and what it meant in his life as a new convert. He had joined in 1964 with the restriction in place. And what really struck me from that oral history is that Darius and Ruffin Bridgeforth and Gene Orr, the three charter members of the Genesis group, they were asking the brethren, they wanted to meet with the brethren, the first presidency, well, actually more precisely, Joseph Fielding Smith, the church president, who at that point was 93 years of age and really wasn't meeting with a lot of people. Anyway, they wanted to meet with him, and the fear was that if these Black Latter-day Saints meet with the church president, they're going to demand the priesthood. And that was the fear that President Smith had. And it was also the fear that if they formed the Genesis group, it might turn into an advocacy group. And it turns out that that was not the case with all of them, but certainly with some of them. And so the fears that President Smith had and his counselors were somewhat justified. But the meeting is that they finally secured a meeting not with the church president. He wouldn't meet with them. His health was in and out. But what the first presidency did, mostly at Harold Lee's direction, who was the first counselor, is they assigned 3 apostles to meet with the Genesis group, or it wasn't the Genesis group yet, but these 3 young Black Latter-day Saints. And then, of course, when elders Monson, Hinckley, and Packer were assigned to them, then they had access to the top quorums of the church. So it was a major breakthrough. And so as they were meeting, just a quick story about this, Eugene Orr, who was the most vociferous of the 3 wanting the priesthood ban, and he asked the apostles so they were meeting in Gordon Hinckley's office, as I recall, the 3, or Bridgeforth and Gray. They were meeting with the 3 apostles, and Gene Orr asked directly, why can't we have the priesthood? And Elder Hinckley recounted Abraham 2, less valiant, some of the traditional rationales. And Gene Orr said, well, why is it Black people don't know this about less valiance and that sort of thing? And Gene Orr, I've interviewed him, and he's just as vocal today as he was back then, which I find refreshing, by the way. And anyway, So in the midst of those negotiations, the brethren were asked, why can't we have the priesthood? And they were caught off guard. They were caught flat-footed. And they said that we've never prayed about it before. We've never, collectively as the top 15, we've never prayed about that before. That was the aha moment that I found from that oral history, is them learning that they had never prayed about it. This is 1973. And anyway, so they met again the following, I think 2 weeks later, they met again. This time Darius wasn't there, according to the records. It was Orrin Bridgeforth. And by that point, they came prepared. They said, we had prayed about it last week in the temple. This is the first time that the Quorum of the 12 and the First Presidency have prayed about it. And the answer from was, it's not ready yet. The time is not ready. And so that's an interesting historical moment that you can chart, where the top leadership of the church is articulating this idea that we've prayed, it's not quite ready yet. And it contradicts a little bit things that we've learned in the previous decades, where they talked about it. Certainly David O. McKay, they talked about it a lot with Nigeria. But according to Harold Lee and others who would have been in those conversations, they had never collectively prayed about it as the top quorums of the church.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, fascinating moment. Paul, I'm going to switch to you now and ask you about this. Well, you are really walking a tightrope in your book because you're writing frank, factual history about race and the priesthood. And you're trying to also reach people who might not know the history or might feel uncomfortable or upset or even scared by this history. So I want to ask you like a teaching question, like how do we, what strategies would you suggest on how to teach about race and the priesthood in a way that is actually holding people to account, and also in a way that's just a productive dialogue in a church setting? So, and I know you have a wonderful section in your book that talks about this. Also, and this is more specific, do you have any suggestions on how to respond to members of the church that offer very problematic justifications for the ban?
Yeah, so the first part of the question, how do you teach about this? I think you have to learn the history first. Make sure that you are on solid ground and not repeating old, tired, racist dogma. So learn the history, like understand the nuances. So read Alice's book, read Matt's book, right? Like learn the history, make sure that you're on solid ground. And then, Deseret book asked me to actually address that. So you're right. In this book, it was a difficult process. A Deseret book asked me to speak as a Latter-day Saint, not as an academic historian, to other Latter-day Saints. And that was a difficult kind of process for me to get my head around and actually inhabit that voice. And then the last part, they asked me to switch from, the historical narrative to how do you grapple with this? And so in the book, I address 4 of what I continue to hear are the most common justifications that continue to circulate amongst Latter-day Saints. So I think we have to understand what they are and then understand why they're wrong for us to be able to teach accurately, as well as to inhabit spaces that ensure that the racism isn't perpetuated. So the first one is simply that sometimes we suggest as Latter-day Saints that the Lord spreads the gospel in stages according to a divine timeline. Jews first and then Gentiles, white people first and then Black people. Let me just repeat, Joseph Smith claimed 5 revelations stipulating the gospel must be preached unto every creature. There was no white people first and then Black people. The first documented person of Black African ancestry baptized into the faith was 1830 Kirtland. There have been Black Latter-day Saints ever since. that includes free Black in the North as well as enslaved Black in the South. We have documented at least 26 enslaved Black people baptized in the South before the end of the Civil War and the passage of the 13th Amendment. Likely many more because record keeping was spotty at best. Some of those in the Century of Black Mormons database, the only record we found naming this person by name is the missionary who wrote that they baptized this person, names them, and that's the only surviving record. Pre-Civil War census records only give hash marks for enslaved people. They do not name them unless they don't show up in a probate record, something like that. These are people who can live and die without any sort of documentation. So simply stating that that is a false narrative. Jews first, then Gentiles, as a parallel to white people first, then Black people, assuming that there were no Black Latter-day Saints until June of 1978. So that is one justification that hopefully we can rid ourselves of. The second one that I deal with in the book is the tribe of Levi example. So God has always discriminated. Professor Randy Bott at BYU said to the Washington Post when Mitt Romney was running for the presidency, God has always discriminated in distributing priesthood authority. He only gave the priesthood to the tribe of Levi in Old Testament times. Inaccurate in and of itself, but used as a parallel to justify the racial restrictions. Man didn't have anything to do with this. God did it. And it's a pattern that God has always followed, discriminating. So we should undermine the rationale in that justification. The tribe of Levi functioned largely as what we might perceive of as temple workers in the present day. Their duty was to welcome the other tribes in to the tabernacle to perform the rituals. None of the tribes were prevented from receiving those rituals. The racial priesthood and temple restrictions were the exact opposite. They kept people of Black African ancestry out. One welcomed them in, the tribe of Levi welcomed the other groups in. The racial priesthood and temple restrictions kept people of Black African descent out. It's a false parallel. The third justification, everyone was racist back then. Certainly, human history is filled with racism. I'm not disagreeing with that. But as historians, we teach what we call presentism. We should avoid superimposing the present on the past, meaning we have to understand the past on its own terms. It's a foreign country. But using presentism to excuse racism in the past is a false application of presentism. So if there was no one advocating for full Black equality in the 19th century, then maybe we could say everyone was racist back then. Remember, as early as the American Revolution, in the wake of the Revolution, you have some Southern enslavers who respond to the ideals of the American Revolution and free their enslaved people. You have Sidney Rigdon arguing for full Black equality. He's a product of the 19th century. You have Joseph Smith sanctioning the ordination of Black people. He's a product of the 19th century. You have Orson Pratt arguing for Black male voting rights in 1852 in Utah Territory. He's a product of the 19th century. It's simply false to suggest everyone's racist back then, and therefore we can't hold them accountable for the racism according to the standards of their own day. And the last justification, giving Black people the priesthood and admission to the temple would have brought down the church. which is also just another false justification that continues to circulate. So Latter-day Saints love to quote from the Wentworth letter, Joseph Smith's standard of truth. The standard of truth has been erected. No unhallowed hand can stop the work from progressing. Persecutions may rage, mobs may combine, armies may assemble, calumny may defame, but the truth of God will go forth boldly, nobly, and independent, till it has penetrated every continent, visited every clime, swept every country, and sounded in every ear, till the purposes of God shall be accomplished, and the great Jehovah shall say, the work is done. Should we really believe that no unhallowed hand can stop the work from progressing, and yet treating Black people equally would have? Those are false justifications that continue to exist, and I continue to hear amongst Latter-day Saints. The only rationale Brigham Young ever gives for the racial restriction is the curse of Ham. He's drawing on the biblical curse in the book of Genesis. Orson Pratt rejects that justification in 1856. We have no proof Africans are the descendants of Cain, Orson Pratt says. It's the only rationale Brigham Young gives, and a Latter-day Saint apostle rejects it. Hopefully, it goes without saying in 2024 that Orson Pratt was correct. Those are the justifications that continue to exist, and it's important to educate ourselves as to why they're false so that we can speak truth.
Oh yeah, no, I think this is such a great part of that book, and it should be required reading for members of the church, especially those who teach within the church. Absolutely. So Alice, I think we actually have time. We have about 4 minutes left before I'm going to hand this over to the audience. So I have time for one last question for you, which is once again springing from the work you've done in your book. So your book is wonderful. It has all these wonderful essays by Black American Latter-day Saints, and which talk about the joys and challenges of navigating their lives as Black Latter-day Saints in the church. These essays are full of wisdom and grace, but they also do not shy away from the challenges and the hurt and the damage that they have experienced because of various policies and teachings within the church. So my question to you is, what steps do you think that the LDS Church could take to meaningfully repair relationships and trust?
That's a hard question. Being married, I've learned that once trust is broken in an area, it takes a lot of work. It isn't a one act and it's done. It's repaired. The trust is restored. And I think the same thing is with any institution, whether it is a corporation, a business corporation, or it is a religious institution. So I think it is several things. One thing that I think that they've used to try to do that has been keeping the Genesis group open and going. Even though there were several time periods when the Genesis group almost disappeared and was done, the church maintained it and kept it going, kept it flowing. And it still exists today. The Genesis group is still open and still available for all Black members to attend today. And white American members are not turned away. I think this is hard. Okay. I really think that the answers to what can be done for the LDS Church or any other religious institution to repair what has been done, those answers are found in the books that Paul and Matt wrote. Number one, like what Paul was saying, number one, learn the history. Learn the history, because truth is not just, how do I say this? Okay, forget that part. The truth of history is as important as The truth of one history is as important as the truth of any other history. Does that make sense how I'm saying that? So the truth of what happened behind the scenes and regarding the temple and priesthood ban is as important as the truth of what happened with the pioneers, how they got to Utah, crossing the plains, the challenges they had, the deaths that occurred. Does that make sense? Okay. One history, the truth of one history is as important as the truth of another. So study and know the history. And then from the history, you can pinpoint the things that, okay, we should not have done that. Past leaders should not have done that. The church institution should not have said this publicly. We can't go back and change that, but here's what we can do going forward. And I think that what Paul has outlined in his book of what individuals can do, like with the common myths, these can be taught as myths. They are falsehoods, and they need to be taught as falsehoods because the damage that was done, not just to Black American members or Black members overall, but to white American members as well, is that falsehood was taught as though it was true. And that is where the damage occurred. And I'm going to use this as an example. And it's the lightest example I can think of that everybody can relate to. So I met this woman, and I was shocked to learn the anxiety and the trauma that she experienced growing up and learning that Santa Claus was not real, because in her family, she was taught that Santa Claus was real. And her parents literally did physical things to prove that Santa was real, that he existed. Like they'd go out on the lawn and there would be deer droppings. Oh, the deer had been here. I mean, seriously, they did literally physical things to prove that Santa Claus came to their house and left those gifts. Like sometimes there would be something remaining in one of the packages being wrapped. That was like the elf got his hands in chocolate and he wrapped the package. Oh my, what a naughty elf. You should have kept your hands clean. I mean, just things like that, right? So there was physical evidence to prove, but the physical evidence was false. It was false. It was created. It was created to prove that something that was false was true. But the damage that it did to her as an adult, she shared with me what that damage was. And I was shocked because I had never considered that something that I thought so innocent would cause so much harm to somebody growing up. But for her, it really did. It jeopardized her relationship with her parents. It jeopardized her relationship with her siblings, some who to the day they were grown in their 60s and their 70s still believed that Santa Claus was real and he still existed and he lived today by some kind of magical thing that that prolonged his life, that he had immortality and he still was on the earth today, and it was hidden from us. We couldn't really see where he lived and where he was and all of that. And so it jeopardized her relationship with them. So any piece of falsehood can damage us, and it damages us inside. It damages our spirit. It damages us psychologically. It damages us. For some people, it can cause mental illness. For some people, it causes them to withdraw. So helping to repair the damage is a long process. And I think that out of all of the books that have been written, I think the three things that most need to be read are Lester Bush's article, because he goes extensively into talking about the minutes from the meeting. I can't remember the name of the meeting. I'm so sorry. The minutes from the meeting, because he actually got access to the meetings where they talked about it. And like, for one thing, Do you know that when the essay on race in the priesthood was released in 2013, that was not the first time that a thorough search was done of records to find out if a revelation had ever been received. It was also not the first time that a search was done to find out what previous prophets had received, had prayed about, and what their answers were to those prayers regarding the priesthood and temple ban. It was not the first time. It had happened in, to my understanding, 3 times now. It's happened 3 or 4 times now. So it's happened several times. And Lester Bush talks about the first time it was ever done. He talks about that in his article. So to read and study that article and pull that information out, to read and study Paul's book and pull that information out, to read and study Matt's book and pull that information out, and then to use all of these together and put together a solid plan of what you're going to do. Like when you had companionship inventory on your mission, when you sit down with your spouse and you decide, these are the goals that we're going to focus on for the next 2 months or the next six months or the next year. You put in place a solid plan based on truth, and then you go forward, and then you split those out, and you determine, okay, here's our goal. This is what we want to do, and this is how we're going to achieve it. Here's the goal. This is what we want to do. This is how we're going to achieve it. And then, because what are we told? I was told in the mission field that a goal not written down is not a goal. It's, it's a flighty wish in the wind, blown away like a feather in the wind can be blown away. And if you want to see an example of what I mean, go to the Genesis group page. And President Ronell Hugh, he's the current president of the Genesis group. He shared on there what the goals were for the Genesis group to reach out to the Black communities in Utah and to help the Black members of the church to feel comfortable and safe in our wards and in our stakes and at activities. And he says the goal, and then he has bullet points of what he's going to do to achieve each of those goals. And that would be a physical example of what I'm talking about. Set the goal and then bullet points of what is to be done to achieve that. It isn't going to be something that's going to be done in a moment, but it's something that has to actively be worked on and to be done with energy, with intent, and especially that word, intention, complete intention.
Thank you, Alice. Yeah. And I don't know if you want to answer this question, so feel free to say pass. But do you think it would be productive if LDS church leaders issued an overt apology for some of the past teachings and policies, or is that not really what you're as interested in?
I'm going to answer that question with 2 examples. Okay. So as a wife, sometimes I get all into my emotions, more than I'm in my head, and being reasonable and sensible. And it's easier for my Robert to hurt my feelings than other times. And he'll do something and I'll get upset, and he'll know I'm upset. And he'll say, "What did I do?" And I'll tell him, "Well, no, it doesn't matter. It does matter, right? It does matter." I'll say, "No, it doesn't matter." He says, "Yes, it matters because you're upset. You need to talk to me." And so I'll tell him what it was, and he'll apologize. He'll say, "I wasn't thinking. I just acted. I wasn't thinking." So a time, because of the delicacy and the high importance of the relationship, that an apology is needed, right? Recently, it's been a couple of months. I think it was in February. an old friend died. And up to 6 months before she died, we were, what is the English word? Alejad. We were not, thank you, estranged. Yes, thank you. We were estranged from one another. And it was because she did something that I just could not be around her anymore. She put my safety at risk, not once, but multiple times. And after talking with her each time, she continued to do that. It was something that happened several times that she did. And she never apologized. As a matter of fact, we had a big argument about it. And it was a blow up argument that literally blew up our relationship, that it no longer existed. And then 6 months before she died, she contacted me and she said, I understand that you have a book. And anyway, she just started the conversation about the book. And then we started talking. And then after several texts back and forth and a couple of phone calls, she said, Alice, I just want you to know that I have regretted so many times not having you in my life. And I'm so sorry. I apologize. And then a few days before she died, my Robert and I went to visit her. And I sat with her alone, just the two of us. And I had my head on her chest and just hugging her and being close to her. And I kept saying to her, I love you and God loves you. I love you and God loves you. And she said to me, and these are her last words to me were, Alice, I'm so proud of you. Everything you've done, I'm so proud of you. So these are two different types of breakups, not breakups, but difficulties that happened that required an apology. She and I would have had our friendship continued all these years, being able to do things together, enjoying our time together, growing together, learning from each other, had that apology and her understanding of the harm that she did had come years earlier. Because I'm not talking a year or two, I'm talking, what, 15, about 16, no, more than 16 years we were distanced from each other because of that. Okay. And when Robert, immediately saw, okay, I need to apologize, he apologized, and it took away, what was done, and it brought us back to one another. It did a restoration to our relationship, and that helped, and that continues to help our relationship to continue forward, right? So those are two different examples to answer that question. It depends on what you want to do. It depends on what they want. What are the outcomes that they want? I mean, it's already been 173 years. We have been talking about the temple and priesthood ban. 173 years. 173 years we have been discussing this. I think it's past time.
All right. Oh, thank you. That's I think that's a wonderful, powerful note to end on. Thank you so much, Alice. And thank you, Paul, Matt, for the great discussion. So, I want to now throw this open to the audience. I'm sure there's so many people here that have questions that they would like to ask. So if you are interested in asking a question, just raise your hand and I'll just go by whoever I see first. And Chris will be delivering a microphone to you.
And I'm going to use this to start because we've got a dozen questions already from our webinar audience. So let me begin. I'm just picking from these. So combining two questions, we haven't really talked about OD2 in 1978. I'm going to put quotes, revelation. So to package this question, there's at some extremes, there's a version of 1978 that talks about that as like a voice from heaven. And there's another version that talks about it as studied, consensus building process. Those may relate to Paul's comments about there not being an early revelation, and do we really need a revelation? But that's just a primer for how you might answer this. Would you comment on the way we think about the 1978 revelation and how that makes us think about future change, current issues, problems that feel like they need to be solved, and how might we move forward?
I think when you write a book, one of the things you want to think about is what do you want to say? You have a limited page count. You want to drive home certain themes. You can't say everything you want to say. And one of the things that I wanted to do in my book is to describe what revelation means institutionally and how it plays out over time, and frankly, how your grandfather dealt with this. And I think in the church that there's been this idea that revelation's passive, that you're lying down on the couch and all of a sudden God tells you what to do. I'm not saying that doesn't happen or you can't get inspiration as you're watching your favorite basketball team, except the Utah Jazz. But anyway, sorry, I'm from Denver. But anyway, but President Kimball was remarkable for describing revelation as an active process, not a passive process. And what he meant by that was that revelations don't come when you're on the couch. I'm using his analogy. They don't come when you're on the couch. They come when you're on, as the church president, when you're on your tippy toes and you're asking God. And the point that President Kimball made, and I make in my book, and other leaders have made this as well, is that it starts by asking questions. You ask questions and you bring it up, broach those questions to your colleagues in the Quorum of the 12 and in the First Presidency, and it could be presented as a problem. We've got this problem in the church. Let's talk about it. And if there's enough agreement, then you keep talking, and then there's, of course, some prayer involved. And then after, when there's agreement, according to section 107, when there's unanimity, then the church president, according to Hugh B. Brown, the church president says, I feel to say this has been a revelation. So it's a very active process. And one of the things I noticed from going through the Spencer Kimball diaries and writing my book is that President Kimball said something insightful, at least to me. He said, this was an exhausting process. And what he meant by that was that it was exhausting asking these questions and debating and discussing, and as Hugh Brown once put it, thrashing it out. And it was exhausting. And the fact that he was able to see that through at his advanced age was, I think, a testament to his leadership.
Yeah, and I want to ask a little bit further question on that, because it was exhausting process, and it was also a very practical process in terms of how President Kimball was able to get this ban lifted. So I was wondering if you could comment on how he finally got enough people in that room to say that they felt like it was the right time to lift the ban. What were some of those practical maneuvers he did?
So the question is, how did President Kimball, how did he get the rest of the brethren to lift the ban? And I want to just pause for a moment and say something about what scholarship is. I think this is something that needs to be said in the church. That is, scholarship's advancing new ideas and challenging old paradigms, and sometimes learning new things makes us uncomfortable. But one of the things I'm challenging is this idea of active versus passive revelation. President Kimball just didn't go to the temple on June 1st and all of a sudden had a great day. God said, lift the ban. That's not how it happened. And what I argue in my book is that that President Kimball had questions about this, the ban and the rationales for it as early as 1954. I got a hold of his scriptures. And he's having this intertextual dialogue in his standard works. This is 1954 when he's in the Quorum of the 12. And he circles these traditional, Cain and Ham and all that stuff. And he's drawing big circles, and he draws a line out to the margins, and he puts a question mark, and he's questioning this. He doesn't believe it. And in any of his other private letters, in all of that, he doesn't once talk about biblical curses. This is another commentary that not all the brethren think alike. And so he's thinking about this in 1954. 1963, pointing to Chris over here, sends Chris's dad a letter. I almost said email. Sends a letter in 1963 to Ed Kimball. And he says that President Kimball, Elder Kimball, says to his son, Edward, he said the ban may have been a possible error, 1963. 1969, Hugh B. Brown says, we got to lift the ban. It's not right. It's a policy, not a doctrine, doesn't require a revelation. Let's just lift it. And Spencer Kimball goes along with it. This is 69. It doesn't work, obviously, for reasons that I talk about in the book. But then by 1973, the ban is on his mind. And the last thing that Hugh B. Brown told Spencer Kimball before Hugh B. Brown died in December of 1975 is, promise me you'll lift this ban. You're the president, you can do it. And President Kimball tells him it's going to take some time. I've got people in the quorum I've got to work with. And that's the active part of the revelation process. I'm going to work with these guys. And then if you see my book, you'll know that this is the plot twist. So forgive me for revealing something. And the plot twist is that he targets Elder McConkie first, the most doctrinal hardliner, as I put it. And he recognizes that he won't go anywhere with this ban unless he gets the church's foremost doctrinal person in his camp. And so he wins over Elder McConkie in the spring of 1977, and then he uses Elder McConkie to convince the rest of the brethren. To be more precise, there are 3 holdouts in the spring of 1978 he can't win over. He tries: Mark Peterson, Ezra Benson, and Del Stapley. And by June 1st of 1978, he says, we're going to do it today. He tried 3 months earlier, didn't have the success. All of the brethren didn't agree. There was no unanimity. Del Stapley, by June 1st, is now in the hospital. Mark Peterson was conveniently sent to Ecuador. Wink, wink, nod, nod. That left one person, Elder Benson, in the room. And Elder Benson, the first thing he said when President Kimball brought it up was, let's table the discussion. He doesn't want to do it. He doesn't support lifting of the ban. And then that's when Elder McConkie and others went to President Kimball's defense. And that's when I like to think that they all gathered around him and stared at him, That's in my mind's eye. But anyway, to Elder Benson's credit, though, he comes around. And then later on, he writes in his diary that it was one of the most beautiful experiences of his life. So to his credit, he does change on that important day in June 1st.
Oh, thank you. I think that's a great story. Any audience questions here? I saw you first. So how about Chris, could you deliver the microphone to this gentleman in the black?
This goes directly to what Alice was saying about trust. And I'd like, if possible, to hear each of you 3 address this. I knew as a 14-year-old, when I first read my father's copy of Mormon Doctrine in 1960, that was not true. And trust, I'm in my 80th year, and I look back and I can see here, when I thought, at this point in my life, all would be peaceful. Every year, the trust grows a little less. And the elephant in the room is, how do I sustain prophets, seers, and revelators who have been telling essentially made up stories and to justify the ban, and claiming that this was from God?
Yeah, so I think that question gets to the heart of prophetic fallibility. Deseret book asked me to address that, believe it or not, in the book that they published. But, I think everyone has to come to their own resolution around that. It's perhaps the price of discipleship for those who believe. And I think we do ourselves and our leaders a disservice when we put them on such a high pedestal that the first time you find out they make a mistake, all is lost. I think it's okay to allow them to be human beings and to allow them to make mistakes. To me, that gives me hope for my own mistakes. And I find hope in leaders who are struggling like I struggle. You know, Brigham Young himself, right? The person who sometimes portrayed as, you know, the strict authoritarian, says, you know, one of his fears is that the people settle down into blind self-security and trust too much without finding out for themselves if they're led by God or not. I think that's actually good advice. That's how I grapple with it. But I understand it does undermine trust, absolutely. Getting Brigham Young's 5th of February 1852 speech and sitting with the weight of that, putting it into sentences with punctuation, reading it and rereading it and rereading it, it's absolutely heavy, and it's drenched in racism, and it undermines trust, right? That's sort of the price of discipleship, I guess, for those who believe.
I'll just say one quick thought on this. So when I hear questions like this, I mean, it's a good question. I'm just being a little facetious, but it's one of the things that bothers me when I'm doing podcasts and I get emails and questions, and I'm happy to always do that. But it's, you know, the brethren are racist. They're having this, you know, existential moment. And my response to that is, and Joseph Fielding Smith is always their go-to guy. And I mean, for good reason. I'm not going to explain this away. But my response is, he was born in 1876 in the Utah Territory, and somehow he was ordained to the Council of 12 in 1910. He's not supposed to be a racist anymore. It doesn't work that way. Your cultural influences come to bear on how you view Black people and other minorities. And in the 20th century, then you get the advent of TV, and that influences your views on race. The point is that Joseph Fielding Smith had never been around Black people before, and he belonged to a church who still clung to some of these rationales for the ban. So it's a little surprised that he had views that would make us wince today. But I think it's important to really contextualize. I'm not excusing it. I'm just simply saying the more interesting thing in my mind as a historian is, did he change? Did he evolve? And if he did, how did he evolve? What influenced him? And I think those are the more, at least for me, the more interesting questions.
So one of the things that I've learned personally is that you don't have to trust, and you should not trust an individual 100% in every area, in every category. Okay. Every individual should earn your trust in whatever category. It's okay if you trust this person to work on your car, but you wouldn't trust them to recommend good books to you, or you wouldn't trust them to counsel you in your marriage, right? You can trust this person to counsel you about a relationship, but you wouldn't trust that person to work on your car or to help you pick out a good car, right? So in every category, to trust somebody in every category, 100% in every category, no. So, and only you can decide this, is what categories can you trust the leaders of the church, of your ward, of your stake, of the general authorities? What categories or category, maybe there's only one, that you can trust them in, and then you go with that. And that will help you to not restore trust, because there's obviously some healing that you need to do from other things. And so you're going to have to go into what is, termed the basement of what's going on in your basement. and why the lack of trust grows more and more to where it's, like this 2 years ago, and now today it's here. You need to figure that out, and you need to choose an area where you can trust them and decide if there is an area where you can.
Yes, uh-huh.
Not putting a question in as much as kind of address what he was just asking, is that part of this problem that we're having is not even LDS. It's about what Paul spoke about earlier. It's an absolute lack of knowledge. We look at the president of the church and say that, first of all, Christ is the only perfect person. Then supposedly next to Christ is the prophet. But we only know that that's only one perfect person. The prophet can't be that one person, that Christ is that person. So we have to get over this idea that somehow he is infallible. The scriptures teach us that. The other thing is that we don't study or understand the old strict scripture that we have. Moses sinned, David sinned, Solomon sinned. We have them in movies as perfect people, but if you read the scriptures, you see the very last challenge that God gives Moses before going into the promised land. He says, go back and get your 2 crutches. Go get your crutch of Aaron, and go get your staff. He's testing him for this last time because he knows Moses isn't perfect, and he's going to set these 2 crutches in front of him and see if he's supposed to do what he's supposed to do. And of course, Moses fails. So how can we look at those people that we see in our scriptures as being perfect and then somehow expect that our modern day prophets will not err? They will absolutely err. That's why we're giving the counsel, as Matthew said, is that we have to study and come to an understanding and a conclusion for ourselves. We can't depend on other teachers.
Right. Thank you so much.
Could I introduce some from the?
Yeah, why don't you take one and then I'll go to you next, okay?
There are like 3 or 4 that I could combine. These are mostly directed to Paul. They have to do with this Let's Talk About series coming out from Deseret book. And if you add them all up there, how has it been received? Is there any chance this can become the study guide for next year's lessons? What's Deseret book up to with this series? That whole.
Okay, so the Let's Talk About series, Deseret Book approached me in 2018 with this series in mind, where they attempt to address sometimes controversial topics and go a little bit deeper than what the Gospel Topics essays did. So full footnotes, but also written for a general Latter-day Saint audience. They asked me to address Let's Talk About Race and Priesthood. I was skeptical, to be honest. I said, I don't believe Deseret Book will be willing to publish whatever I write on this topic, because I didn't think they would be willing to go where I thought the topic deserved to go. And they assured me that that was what the series was designed to do. And it took a long time, right? It was published in 2023. And I was as surprised as anyone to actually see it in print. Very protracted approval process. It does exist. And I assumed it would be on the shelf for a month and then be yanked. I was told by the president of Deseret Book, hand-delivered copies to my office upstairs, and said they won't be on the shelf in Deseret Book for another week and a half. Please do not even mention this on social media until they're on the shelf. I had friends who weren't aware that this was even in the process, right? So the approval process dragged on for a very long time. Surprised that it existed. And not only have they not backed away from it, but they have now translated it into Portuguese. So yeah, yes. I had, Brazilian Latter-day Saints who read it in English and said, can this be translated into Portuguese? All I did was forward those emails onto Deseret Book, skeptical again, and they took them seriously and produced a Portuguese translation. So the other part of the question, how has it been received? I have received a handful of nasty email, but the vast majority have been very positive. And I just simply, so these are people who take the time to actually look up my email address and to send me a note. I copy and paste those into a running document that I occasionally send on to Deseret Book. So a handful, I think maybe 5 or 6 negative, really negative. The rest overwhelmingly positive. And that document is now up to, I think, like 26, 27 pages. A Word document where I just copy and paste the email into that running document. So that's just the evidence that I have of how it's been received. That includes from international locations, a bishop in Vienna, Austria, right, saying, I want to introduce this to my congregation. The other part of the question, could this be a part of the curriculum? I don't think that's ever going to happen. I would love it if it did, but remain incredibly skeptical. The Come Follow Me curriculum for DNC, if you skip ahead to when it deals with OD2, it uses the language of "we don't know." So that's the official curriculum, and we're stuck on "we don't know." There's a lot we do know, and I think, my co-panelists have given us all kinds of evidence that we do know, and the fact that Come Follow Me still says "we don't know" in 2025, is why I'm skeptical that it would ever be a part of curriculum. But it has been assigned in classes at BYU, for example. So, it is a part of some curriculum. I sometimes get emails from my colleagues there, and it was selected by the BYU History Department as the book of the year that it came out, and those who take the historian's craft class were given copies. So there are ways in which it is, making its way into some curriculum. So Greg Christopherson asked me to present on it for 2 stakes that he organized, combined stakes, and then his brother, Elder Christopherson, gave another fireside, and it was an open conversation.
Very widely appreciated. So it's not, these books are doing an awful lot of good for people who want to know more and deeper study. So whether that would become part of the seminary or I don't know. But I think it leads the way to that. It really opens the door.
I think so. Greg said, he organized this. There were 8 firesides. They're all grounded in these Let's Talk About series. And then his brother gave the concluding fireside. And he just, I'm saying this for the Zoom. He also then suggested, right, it opens the door, right? So seminary and institute teachers have documented resources, right, that they can then use to hopefully teach, more accurate history. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to go to the gentleman who had his hand up.
Thank you. Paul, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about your involvement with the Gospel Topics essay, and were you able to come to share with the same conclusion that you did with the Deseret book? And I'll just summarize that by saying that the conclusion was God was not behind the ban. And if you did all that, who took it out?
Okay, so question about gospel topics essay. So the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints asked me to help with, produce a 55-page research essay, full footnotes, all of those kind of things like I would do writing a scholarly article. They are the ones who then reduced that down to what got put online, and I had no control over that. So yeah, I mean, my conclusion was that it was not of divine origins before I started that process. The evidence that has come to light has only made me more solidified there. Obviously, I include that in Deseret book, but what the gospel topics essay that were produced were done anonymously. In other words, not attributed to any author. The original plan was that there would be a paragraph level answer, then a medium answer, and then a person who is more interested could click and get a PDF of the 55-page answer. And that would be attributed to the scholar. As the process played out over time, the ground shifted. The paragraph answer and the 55-page answer went away, and they only used then what they produced, boiling down the 55-page answer to something that the church history department produced and released publicly. So yeah, that's a little bit of the process. So was I frustrated with some things? Absolutely. Was I thrilled by some things? Absolutely. Yeah.
All right, wonderful. Another question from the audience? Yes. I
was really struck in the early 1950s, the whole don't ask, don't tell in South Africa, where what I can determine is that the phenotype characteristics define who gets the priesthood, which, you look at the Q15, how educated they are. It dawns on no one that that's given blacks the priesthood. Just want to know if any response of what they were thinking or talking. It really struck me as just not being very aware.
About the awareness would be
well, they use don't ask, don't tell. So if you look white, and we'll let you have the priesthood. We're not going to ask you to do your genealogy. Don't talk to folks about it. Don't. Maybe you shouldn't even do your genealogy. And that's how they solve that problem. When at the end of the day, that's given blacks the priesthood. In fact, I have a little bit of black in me, by the way, but it seems that policy, and I don't know if that was a real policy because of disagreement, but that letting that stand struck me that they did that.
So let's go just broader for a quick moment. This is me being professorial for 2 seconds, but this is the 20th century where Americans in general are struggling to police racial boundaries. This is after the American Civil War, where the U.S. Census in 1930 defines a Negro in those days as anybody with one drop. And there are different fractions that states use to define who is black and who is not. And I don't have to tell anybody in this room that these are just fractions of lawmakers sitting around tables in South Carolina and Virginia, and they're constructing race. I mean, think about this for a minute. You can be 1/8 black, classified black in Virginia, go across the state border over to North Carolina, it's 1/4. And you could be black in one state and you can be considered white in the next. I mean, this is just racial fluidity. It's obviously just a construct, and today, to our modern sensibilities today, it's just nonsense. The brethren are caught up in this. This is part of the 20th century, and the church follows the one drop rule. That just simply means that if you have 100 ancestors and one derives from sub-Saharan Africa, you're considered black. And it's not based on skin color, it's based on African lineage. That's the key part, right? And so They know that they're conferring priesthood ordination on people from South Africa, people from Brazil and other places in the church. They know this, they talk about it, and it's very difficult. Some of you I know in the room have served in Brazil. This is a problem. And one of the things that happens in 1978, of course, is they can put that one drop nonsense behind them, and it doesn't really matter, the lineage thing. But that's what the church had followed for a long time. And there's been some scholarship done, some of it in my book, some of it in Paul's wonderful Century Black Mormons project here, quite a bit of it actually. And also in Paul's book, Religion of a Different Color, deals with this idea that people are of mixed race and they're getting their temple ordinances because they look white, but yet they have ancestry that derives from sub-Saharan Africa. But the point is that in some points in the 19th and 20th century, the brethren know that this is happening. And then sometimes they ask them to stay their hand and to not, if they're a priesthood holder, to not continue to participate actively their priesthood assignment. In other cases, they just simply look the other way. And in the 1970s, President Kimball knows that this is happening. He knows in South Africa, in particular, in Brazil, that there are persons of mixed race ancestry who hold the priesthood. And they're good priesthood holders, they're good ministers in their congregations. And this is yet one of the many factors that makes the ban unsustainable, because they're already conferring ordination and allowing mixed race families to go to the temple.
I'll just add, when David O. McKay goes to South Africa in 1954, right, he reverses guilty until proven innocent, innocent until proven guilty. Like Matt said, when they are going into South America, J. Reuben Clark says, obviously. So I think your question was, how much are they aware? And J. Reuben Clark will say, obviously, we are ordaining people of African ancestry. Yeah, I think it's like Matt said, they're immersed in a broader American culture. Plessy versus Ferguson institutionalizes nationwide hypodescent. And the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints will, in 1907, put its own hypodescent policy in place for priesthood ordination and temple admission. So they're caught up in that. They are buying into that. It's a part of the broader culture. Who can we legally segregate in the state of Virginia? And the state of Virginia will adopt a one-drop policy, meaning you can legally segregate someone who looks white, but they have one drop in the vernacular of the day of Black African ancestry, sub-Saharan ancestry. And therefore, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, they're caught up in that bigger kind of understanding. And that's how I see them trying to justify it. Also recognizing, right, especially in South America, the populations are of mixed racial descent, and DNA teaches us, right, that trying to figure it out one drop of anyone's ancestry is impossible. Good luck. And Matt mentioned, the Century of Black Mormons database. We have several families in that database. I have white Latter-day Saints in the 21st century sending me an email and saying, I have African ancestry in my DNA. I've done family history. I think it traces back to ancestor X or Y. And if so, we would love to have them remembered in your database. And we do the research and we include them. And eventually these families will pass as white. And they, when the family passes as white, those generations continue to be ordained to the priesthood, continue to receive temple admission. If you use one drop as the standard, there has never been a period of Latter-day Saint history without people of Black African ancestry attending the temple and receiving the priesthood. And the database makes that clear, right? We trace them up through the generation who passes as white, but you multiply those generations, like there are hundreds and then thousands within a few generations in one family. The Nelson Holder Ritchie family, who I opened the book with, this is, a formerly enslaved man. And all 9 of his children received temple admission and priesthood ordination before June of 1978. They all pass as white. The children of a formerly enslaved man, right? So, yeah, I mean, DNA teaches us, right, the impossibility of policing racial boundaries. Leadership was caught up in the same kind of segregationist standards that animated the nation at the time.
Sure. We have by the way, we have about 5 more minutes before we're going to be turning this over to Stephen Bradford. But
Okay.
go for it.
So also in South Africa, in South Africa, I learned from reading Matt's book that there were people who knew living in South Africa that if they remained there, they would be denied the priesthood and the temple privileges. And so they migrated to Utah, where the bishops ordained them, and the men received the priesthood and the families went to the temple and were sealed together. So that's an example of what the whole ban created. It created this, I don't want to say a culture of deception, but this is what we want to do, and these should be our privileges too. If we stay here, we're denied all of this. If we move here, we can have it all. And a lot of families did that, as Matt's book points out.
Chris, I see you wanting to ask one.
Never get done with all the questions, but I want to give our other audience a fair chance.
Yeah.
So this is probably addressed to Alice, but the way the question comes is, thanks for mentioning Jane Manning. And Alice, it's great that you're here. We talk about this as a priesthood ban, but would you speak to Black women in this history?
We typically call it the temple and priesthood ban, and people think that when we call it that, the Black women are left out of it. But Black women are not left out of that, because Black women could not go to the temple. If a Black woman was married to a white man, they could not go to the temple to be sealed, because even though he would be worthy to go to the temple, she was not allowed. She would not be allowed. So it didn't matter what the circumstance was. Black women were barred. They were banned at every turn. They were barred. This was something that impacted Black men and Black women. And I just want to point out, because we talk a lot about Africans and Brazilians and the Caribbeans being impacted by the ban. But you know, the ban was initially established where? In the United States. And who were the Black people who were here? They were the descendants of the formerly enslaved. So Black Americans were the ones initially impacted and barred from all of these blessings and abilities within the church, all of these avenues within the church. It was Black Americans, not the Caribbeans, not the Africans, and not the Brazilians. It was us, the Black Americans, descendants of the formerly enslaved. And it impacted women as much as it impacted men.
Right. Thank you. You know, it is now time to turn it over to Stephen. Thank you for the questions. I think this was a terrific discussion. I know there are probably 20 of you that have a question you would like to ask. I do believe our panelists will be hanging around after this, so do feel free to come up and talk to them and ask a question then. Stephen, let me hand you a microphone. Oh, you got one. You got one microphone. Yes. Go ahead, Stephen.
Yes, I'm Steve Bradford. I'm the son of Mary, Dialogue's first female editor. Rebecca England is our current Dialogue board chair. She's the son of Gene, who founded Dialogue 60 years ago at Stanford. We're delighted to have Charlotte England here today, seated on the front row. Very inspiring to have her here with us. Of course, over here is Chris Kimball, a grandson of Spencer, the prophet who actually read Lester Bush's article. And thereafter sought and received the 1978 revelation that brought the Church of Jesus Christ a little bit closer to the gospel of Jesus Christ. Now, Rebecca, Chris, and I could wax eloquently and at length about all that's been accomplished in the 60 years since Rebecca's father founded Dialogue, but we'll go ahead and stop hindering you from socializing and hanging out by keeping my remarks mercifully short this evening. But I do want to thank Paul Reeve for so graciously offering us this facility here. And just two quick administrative notes, and then I'm going to go into a 3.5-minute spiel that you're going to have to listen to. The first note is if you do choose to linger, please do consider purchasing books from our distinguished panelists behind you as you exit. Also, there's a free copy if you haven't already gotten this. Please do pick it up. This is the Dialogue article that, in the words of Greg Prince, changed the church. So now for my 3.5-minute spiel. I love our Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, together with our hopeful doctrine and our glorious, expansive theology. In my mind, our church doesn't, or at least shouldn't, have much doctrine, and I'm not alone in thinking this way. Jesus is recorded, declaring multiple times in both ancient and modern scriptures that his doctrine is to repent and come unto him, and that we are all invited to do just that, that we shouldn't add or subtract from that or prevent anyone from basking in the light and love of his gospel. On the other hand, our church has a lot of great theology informed by our scholars and theologians, and we've heard from many of them today, and there's many of you in this room. Theology for me is about cultivating ways to unify the human with the divine. It's about seeking an atonement with deity and each other. And to me, one of the best places to experience that at-one-ment is in the temple. Now, I'll admit that at times I've been bored out of my gourd in the temple, yet my most gratifying epiphanies, where I've literally felt myself communing with deity and feeling their unconditional love for me, has also occurred in the temple. Our church's limited doctrine and expansive theology should never allow our culture to deny access to the temple or any other divine blessings. And so I'm deeply grateful for Dialogue's key role in theologically deactivating what was once thought to be doctrine, thereby making space for our prophets to lift the hurtful temple and priesthood ban on our church's Black communities. In so doing, I gratefully acknowledge Dialogue's additional role in activating previously underused yet irreplaceable doctrine that all of us are alike unto God, that our loving heavenly parents invite all of us, Black and white, bond and free, male and female, everyone in between, to come and partake of their supreme goodness. And now, more than 50 years after Lester Bush's groundbreaking scholarship, I see Dialogue continuing to be an essential player in breaking down cultural barriers to our Black, LGBTQ, and other marginalized church members' access to the divine. For that reason, I include Dialogue, and I welcome each of you to include Dialogue in your circle of worthy causes. Your Dialogue donations will help us advance its independent engagement in humanizing our church's theology through articles, essays, poetry, art, and other literary endeavors. More information on how to give to Dialogue is set forth in the back of this booklet. And so please go there. There's a QR code, or you can go to the website. So in conclusion, Your financial support of Dialogue's steady, independent voice will be gratefully put to use. Your support will be used to bolster Dialogue's historic role as a motivator for study, reflection, and even revelation. Revelation that can change us and sometimes even change the church, moving us a little closer to the at-one-ment that we all yearn for within our church communities. So it's been great here to gather with you, to dialogue with all of y'all. So let's keep it up, and thank you for coming today.
Greetings, my name is Rebecca DeSchweinitz, and I'm thrilled to serve as a board member at the Dialogue Foundation and as one of the hosts of Dialogue Gospel Study. In each episode, which we record live the second and fourth Sunday of every month, we welcome esteemed speakers from a variety of backgrounds to share their insights and perspectives on the Come Follow Me lessons. Our aim is to spark meaningful conversations about the scriptures, to connect them to our personal experiences and to our understandings and explorations of the gospel. To stay in the loop with our upcoming lessons and this opportunity to engage with Mormon thought, culture, and belief, be sure to visit dialoguejournal.com and sign up for our newsletter. By doing so, you'll receive updates and timely links to join our live stream lessons. Additionally, you can catch up on our past guests and episodes by subscribing to Dialogue Journal on YouTube, Facebook, or wherever you listen to podcasts.
Dialogue Podcast Network.